Hey, welcome to Plant Yourself. I'm your host, Howard Jacobson. Two quick announcements before we get to today's show. If you're interested in becoming a health coach, I'm offering another run due to popular demand for people who can't make 8 p.m. on Wednesday nights, Eastern Time. So we're doing another run of the program, which will meet, the practicums will meet at 10 a.m. on Wednesdays, Eastern Time, U.S., which means if you're in Europe or Africa, that might be good for you. Also, if you're in the U.S. and evenings aren't good and you have free time in the mornings, either 7 a.m. Pacific time or 10 to 11:30 Eastern, then you can participate. If you want to find out more about becoming a wicked effective health coach, you can go to wellstartcoach.com. Second thing is, if you're not aware of it, Josh LaJaunie and I have a book that is free on Amazon Kindle. It's called Sick to Fit. And if you just go to Amazon and search for Sick to Fit, you'll be able to download it for free and read it on any Kindle-enabled device, even a phone, smartphone, tablet, computer, whatever. All right, let's get to today's episode. This is the Plant Yourself podcast. I'm Howard Jacobson of plantyourself.com, WellStart Health, and Sick to Fit. This podcast is part of my mission to help you live a healthy and hydrated life. Today's guest is Rich Razgaitis, who is the CEO and co-founder of a company called FloWater, whose mission is to decentralize and democratize fresh, healthy, clean, safe drinking water. And in our conversation, we talk about bottled water and how bottled water is the new cigarette. It hurts those who drink it, and it hurts everyone else. If you've heard of secondhand smoke, you've got to be next to the smoker to get the effects of that. But we're getting the effects of millions and millions and millions of bottles being thrown away every single day in our food supply, in our water supply, and in our own endocrine systems. Rich and I talk about the issue itself, what are the health dangers, the environmental dangers, how he got involved in the problem in the first place, what his own awakening was, and what each of us can do as individuals and as advocates for a sane, healthy society. 3 ultra quick announcements before we get there. First one, there's still room for the Sick to Fit retreat in New Orleans with me and Josh LaJaunie. Check it out at sicktofit.com/NOLA, N-O-L-A. That's March 5th through 8th, 2020. It'll be a blast. Second thing, if 2020 is your year to get fit and healthy, to turn things around, and you'd like some help, I can help. So I'm looking for 3 new coaching clients in January of 2020, and you can find out more about that at plantyourself.com/laser. Third thing, I'm committing to playing big in 2020, and part of that mission includes growing the podcast, growing its reach, growing its influence, being more of a voice for health and sanity. You know, the world is on fire. The world needs this message. The world needs each of us to do what we can. And if you'd like to help me do what I can, I need to spend more time on the podcast, producing, promoting, marketing, growing it. And you can help by becoming a patron, by becoming a supporter of the show. If you go to plantyourself.com, there's a donate button on the top menu. Or if you go to patreon.com and search for Plant Yourself, you can also find the show, find me, and become a sustaining member, a part of the community, helping us bring this message to more and more people. All right, so let's get to today's conversation. Without further ado, Rich Razgaitis, welcome to the Plant Yourself podcast.
Great, Howard, thank you. It's a pleasure to be on the show.
You are with FloWater. Like, are you the like CEO, founder, chief visionary?
Officially, my title is CEO and co-founder of FloWater, and has been since early stages, going back to 2013.
Let's just start with the basics. What is FloWater, and why should we care?
Great. Well, FloWater, kind of in its simplest form, explained in kind of a bite-sized piece, is FloWater is a refill station that takes tap water, potable tap water, anywhere in the world in any kind of water line hookup. And it's basically a device that purifies, remineralizes, removes impurities from that water, and dispenses what is the equivalent of something that's better than bottled water on tap with zero packaging, zero waste. And so that's the product that we have today. So when someone asks kind of tactically or product-wise, what is FloWater? That's the answer. The bigger answer, if I may, around what is FloWater is, FloWater is really a movement around the decentralization and democratization of water. And so what that means is we're trying to effectively undo all of the packaging that exists for distributing and delivering water throughout the world by getting consumers to go back to the tap again and fall in love with the tap. And the reason that packaged water exists is because people don't like or don't trust the taste of tap water. It's not because we don't have enough water faucets or water spigots. No one says, gosh, I got to drink bottled water because I can't find a water faucet. That's never the case. They drink it because they have some preconceived, which could be a perception or a real notion around why they shouldn't or can't or don't like to be drinking out of tap water. So our real vision is to radically change the way that people view and distribute and consume water. And the mission of the company is to put an end to single-use plastics as well as single-use packaging while providing a powerful way to hydrating millions of Americans and ultimately hundreds of millions of people around the world.
Wow, there are so many layers to that. I hope we can cover them all. But let's start with you said you've been there since 2013, so this is 7 years now. What led you and whoever your co-founders were to want to take this on? Because it feels like a very strange thing to take on in an entrepreneurial way, almost like it's entrepreneurship to some extent that's gotten us into this mess.
Right. That's an interesting way of posing the question, and it's an interesting question in and of itself. I think I can speaking from my own perspective, from a personal paradigm and philosophy around what has captivated me by this cause and this mission that we're on. Really, there's three driving kind of force functions for me. Number one is on a personal level, I had a very transformative experience around wellness and weight loss and fitness and clean eating and hydration about 10 years ago. I'm 46 now, so I was in my mid-30s, 35, 36, 37 when that happened. And that intersected with, and by the way, that kind of drove me to want to think about things that were meaningful towards human health and performance and behavior. That intersected with kind of point number two, which is when I co-founded the company in 2013, I had two daughters that were the age of 10 and 11, Royce and Zoe. So Royce was 11 at the time, Zoe was around 10. And I was going to their soccer games, and it hit me how much crap we are programming our kids into consuming at a very early age. It basically is big tobacco in the 60s, like programming teenagers and high school kids and college kids for what later became lifelong dependencies, brand affinity, dependencies, addictions. But it was like soda and candy bars for kids being programmed at a younger age through marketing, through parents bringing candy bars and soda pop to the soccer game and the soccer practice. And it really hit me powerfully, which is our kids are getting programmed into these lifelong, and I'd been on the other end of kind of correcting those at the age of 35, 36, 37. So those were two major catalysts. And then kind of the third was big problem around the environment with these plastics that, turn into 50 years ago, there were no plastics in the ocean. Today, you and I, if you drink out of tap water that's unfiltered and unpurified or bottled water, today we average, as Americans, we drink on average 2 credit cards worth of plastic every month just through water. And that's in the form of microplastics. And that's a huge issue. And so that was kind of the third catalyst of, there's a huge problem that we have that's started years ago, and it's accelerating, and now it's a clear megatrend. I mean, plastics and single-use plastic water bottles are being clearly seen as the new environmental cigarette. So those were the three reasons, a little bit of protracted explanation around it, but there were a lot of kind of catalyzing forces for me personally that drove me into this.
Well, we're gonna protract them even more because I'm really curious about all of them. But it's just like this weird irony that the solution to microplastics in our tap water is plastic water bottles that contribute to microplastics in our tap water.
Well, it is kind of ironic if you think about this, that what people thought, this is the whole chain, and like how you just kind of articulated it and extrapolated it out. Many times people drink bottled water thinking that it's cleaner or purer or tastes better than tap water. In some cases that's true, but 50% of the time, about half of all packaged bottled water is tap water in a plastic water bottle. In fact, there's an expression sometimes people say, which is that bottled water companies don't sell bottled water, they sell plastic bottles that happen to contain water in it. And about half the time that's tap water. So like the irony is that in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, as packaged water started to proliferate, and now there's hundreds of different brands, that it's now ended up in our oceans, lakes, rivers, and landfills. 50 billion single-use plastic water bottles get consumed in the US alone every year. 38 billion of those end up being unrecycled. And when plastic reaches the environment, and when it reaches the ocean, it doesn't biodegrade, it photodegrades, and it turns into microparticulates. And now we are literally drinking the plastic in our tap water that we had been using with, in part, bottled water because we thought it tasted better or was cleaner or what have you. In many cases, it's the same as tap water.
Is there data on what that does to our health?
There's not yet. There's that. So yes and no. If you were to ask for outcome-specific data on what does prolonged exposure to microplastics do in terms of outcome and future state, I know of no data, and I've done a lot of research along it. There is secondary data, and then there's category leading and markers that I think we should be really concerned about. And so let me give you an example of that. In cigarettes, there are approximately 6,000 known chemicals that are involved in the final production and kind of assembly and distribution of a single cigarette. And we know now, after a period of long, protracted tobacco use, particularly in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and the data that came out of it in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, the deleterious and destructive, like life-ending, year-ending effects of tobacco. Let me draw a parallel. So I use a lot of parallels with big bottled water and big tobacco. There's a lot of changes as relates to the a lot of similarities as relates to the company's social behavior and pressure, et cetera. But in the production and in the petroleum that go in to make the plastics in bottled water, there are over 10,000 known chemicals that get created as part of that creation process. So almost twice the amount of chemicals in single-use plastic water bottles that are used to kind of form and create those bottles than what is in tobacco. Now, I'm not suggesting bottled water, is at all parallel in terms of health outcomes in cigarettes. My only point, though, is that you can look at the chemicals, and some of those chemicals are endocrine disrupting chemicals that have metabolic changes in effect. And I think bottled water, and I think the consumption of microplastics is going to be much more like a negative effect along the lines of something like cigarettes. In like cigarettes, one won't kill you. 10,000 isn't good for you. 100,000 is pretty bad for you. You're going to start to have the effects of it. And I think bottled water is exactly the same way, which is after drinking 10,000 or 100,000 bottles of water, or now the problem is you don't have to be drinking bottled water to be drinking bottled water. When you drink tap water, you and I, Howard, drink tap water, chances are that we are drinking bottled water, just the microparticulate plastic of that bottled water and other plastics.
We're drinking instead of drinking water in plastic, we're drinking plastic in water.
Exactly. Yes, that's precisely.
Wow. And I imagine it's going to be harder to prove. Tobacco is notoriously hard to prove because you never could do a randomized clinical trial to get people to smoke. But at least you had epidemiologically, you had a clear distinction between smokers and non-smokers. This is something that is so ubiquitous. It's this uncontrolled experiment in which all of us are consuming the same thing. So, then we can say, well, autism is increasing. Well, it must be that we just didn't have the right diagnostic criteria before, but it was the same. We have no way of knowing how the numbers are going up and down from the endocrine disruptors in the pollutants in our water and air.
Right. And I think that's why it's for us, it's one of the driving factors around providing clean, great tasting water that people love and trust. At the same time, I think getting people and I think there's enough evolution in the market today, which is much different than 10, 20, 30 years ago, around clean eating, clean drinking, what's in the food source, like the level of consciousness and awareness of pollutants. And I think now consumers' disposition towards making a decision of, I do not want to drink that because it contains these particulates, is a lot stronger today than it existed 10 years ago. We see this with food sources. I mean, if you even look in the dairy section of a Whole Foods, it's kind of incredible what's happened over a period of just 3, 5, 10, 15 years in terms of where ingredients are sourced and what consumers select as it relates to source. And I think that now just becomes more prolific as we look at other products that we're putting into our body, including water.
Right. Yeah, and I want to talk about like the issue of habit formation. Maybe come back to that in a little bit because I still want to follow up on your 3 driving force functions. I'm curious about your health, transformation. What from what to what?
Well, I'll tell you. It started with me. Like this goes back to part of the underpinnings of what happens in adolescence that someday hits you at 35 or 40 and it causes you to make a different career decision or in kind of an aspirational, inspirational career decision. So here's like going all the way back. I grew up in an environment where, I would consume a lot of soda, eat a lot of donuts. I mean, I love donuts to this day. I don't eat very many of them, but it doesn't mean I don't think about eating them a lot. And I have a soda one day a year. On every Thanksgiving, I'll have a Dr. Pepper. That's it. That is my time a year. So like everything in moderation, but I grew up consuming this as a daily staple, and it was fine for me. Like it was fine for me because I was young, and same with a lot of other kids. You don't know any better. And I did that through college and playing sports through college. I played football through college. And all was fine. I bulk up a little bit. That was good. Like, you wanted to be a little bit, beefier on the football field.
What position?
As a tight end.
Okay.
So so like putting on another 10 pounds was generally a good thing. And I was working out all the time. Then 23 happened and I wasn't playing ball anymore. I was taking doctors out to dinners. I was working in the pharmaceutical industry, both like in the commercialization side as well as corporate marketing later. And I had all these bad habits that had continued for years. And those 23 turned into 28, which means like 220 pounds of muscle mass turned into like 220 pounds of not so much muscle mass. And then at one point it turned into like 270 pounds, 280 pounds of not a lot of muscle mass at all and a lot of obesity. And I got to the point where I remember watching years ago, there was some dating show, whatever the dating show was that was online. I think it was the original Bachelor series. And everyone loved this guy that was the fat guy. Everyone described him as the fat guy. And I remember looking at that guy and thinking, that guy's skinnier than I am. Like, I turned into the fat guy. And that was kind of the metamorphosis. That was part of my change of, I always wanted to run a marathon. And, by the time I'm 35, 32, and I'm like, ranging between 250 and 270 pounds, I'm going in the wrong direction. And so
how tall are you?
6'2". So like for context, I'm 196 pounds today.
Okay.
So, I'm 6'2", 6'3", like right in the midpoint there. So, like 200, 220, like is great. 190 is great. 270, not so good, especially when I'm not working out feverishly. And so that was kind of the first metamorphosis, which is I learned, and I was still working out, by the way, but I just wasn't working out like I was. So one of the things I learned was that you can't outwork a terrible diet. And one of the things that you can't do as part of a diet is if you're consuming 500, 700 calories of soda a day, you just can't outwork that. I mean, a robust workout of 500 to 800 calories, you're maybe breaking even on just your caloric intake from soda if you're drinking sugary carbonated beverages. And so that was a huge aha for me. And so kind of a long story short on that was cleaned up the diet, started work, now I do very vigorous intermittent fasting. I fast till 2 to 4 p.m. every day, have a narrow fasting interval. I do keto now, but even like 10, 12, 15 years ago, started running, started CrossFitting, started doing a lot of HIIT works, high intensity impact training. And then a lot of it was cutting out unnecessary calories. I mean, I was consuming an inordinate amount of calories through like candy bars and soda, and changing my mindset around that. And that's one of the passions around FloWater is when we deploy a FloWater unit, not to make this sound like a commercial or a plug for a FloWater unit, but one of the things that I love about it is when someone has a FloWater in their hotel, their school, their corporation, we'll see a 50% reduction in soda and coffee consumption. And that's because they're drinking more water. And if they're drinking more water, they're more apt to make healthier decisions in other areas of their life. And so for me, part of it was like, well, how do I level set a reformation of good, healthy patterns and then abide by that? And it was like a long process for me to kind of figure that out. I'm embarrassed to say it took me a couple years or a year to really dial that in. And it took me 12 years of bad eating, bad living in an unhealthful way to figure that out.
Yeah, and I mean the thing with that is like I'm imagining, you putting on maybe 5-10 pounds a year. There was never a moment that you could look in the mirror, or look on the scale and say anything much had happened, right? Until you had the mirror of the fat guy on the original Bachelorette,
right?
Who, right? Because like all of a sudden this threshold was available to you. But for most of us, there is no threshold because we're looking around. Whether you're going to your kid's soccer game and you're seeing all the kids eating the same thing and all the parents excusing it, right? As if they're always going to be 11 and 12 and 23 and never 30 and continuing the same habits. Or you see everybody drinking bottled water or drinking soda and it becomes the normal. It's really hard to kind of, be the outlier in your world.
I think that's a great observation, which is it's one of those things like as relates to weight loss or fitness or any number of other things as well, is that incrementalism in the wrong direction is really, really, really dangerous because you notice it, right?
Right.
I'm a fan of incrementalism on the upswing, but you need to have a catalyst to know to make and like the way I'm wired is I kind of needed it to be like 5 or 10 increments at a time rather than like 1 or 2 at a time. So when I got on the fitness bandwagon, it was, cessation of alcohol, cessation of soda, complete, eradication of sugar, and a lot of working out. So I kind of tried to hit it all at once. But I think to your point, this is the danger of, societies, politics, your spiritual soulfulness, your work environment, your fitness, whatever it is. Incrementalism on the way down is a very, very dangerous thing if left unchecked. And I think it's one of the things that I always have tended to appreciate people that have a curiosity of, well, why are we doing this way? Or why do I do this? Or why do I behave in this way? Or why is this happening from a societal perspective? Because that curiosity is what starts to pick at a better way or an improvement. And sometimes it is an incremental improvement. Sometimes it's a radical one.
Right. See, but one of the reasons I wanted to have this conversation is, my shtick is helping people base it with lifestyle. And mostly it's diet and exercise. And, this podcast, I advocate a plant-based diet as opposed to keto. But I think you and I can probably agree on 90% of the details of what people should and shouldn't be eating. And the frustration is that I am working with individuals and almost like turning them into battering rams against the culture. Like, okay, you want to eat healthy, you've got to now stop doing the things that you've been doing with your coworkers, with your family. You can't, pop into the Burger King, into the fast food drive-through. Like all these individual things that people have to stop doing while society takes a really long time to catch up. And what I love about what you're doing is you're putting a machine somewhere, essentially, that changes people's behaviors in a way that feels effortless. And like the way I'm thinking about it is, so I spent a certain amount of time like traveling and flying, and I would always, I'm a good boy, so I take my little water bottle, whether it's, the plastic one or a metal one. And at the airport, they always have these water fountains with like the worst flow. Like it's barely over the lip. Like you'd have to like, French kiss the piece of metal to get something. And there I'm like, how the hell am I going to fill my bottle with this thing? And then all of a sudden they started putting in these fillers, and the bottle just sits there, and it's kind of cool. And it's got a number, how many gallons saved. And it's like, oh, all of a sudden that became easier than trying to suck off the water fountain or fill my little bottle. Right. And like, so I just joined a gym that has a FloWater, and there's the FloWater unit, and then there's the kiddie water fountain and the grown-up water fountain. And there's no way in the world that I wouldn't just stick a bottle in the FloWater, because now I can take the bottle to my machine or to my treadmill. And you've essentially changed my behavior for me without me having to do a damn thing.
Well, I think, thanks for sharing that story, by the way. Going into this, I did not know that you had a FloWater in your gym. So that's great that you've actually had a use case and an experience with it. I think this is one of the things about behavior change, and you probably will have some really great insights as it relates to your coaching and the practice and the philosophy around aligning people towards a plant-based diet, of which I'm a huge fan. I need a little bit of animal. For me, I need a little bit of animal protein, but a huge fan of plant-based diet. Michael Pollock's book, great, is kind of many years ago a cursor for me in terms of looking at how I change behavior. But I think if you look at FloWater and the story that you just shared, and kind of that narrative, that use case, is if we want to change consumer behavior, we ideally need to make it easier for them and preferential, right? So if I try to get somebody to change a behavior by saying, hey, stop using single-use plastics, and you got to go use something that you're going to hate using it, and it's going to taste disgusting, and it's going to be a gross experience, and it's really slow, and you got to bend over, what have you, to like fill up your bottle and like kind of get it to the lip of it. It's not going to be a very successful, enduring behavior change. This is why recycling rates in the US, why are recycling rates virtually unchanged over the last 10, 15, 20 years? It's because the behavior and the action of it and the perceived impact of it is not more powerful than, unfortunately, the simplicity and the convenience of just throwing it all away. And so a big part of what we're doing is, so that FloWater experience that you have in your gym, ultimately we want to create and put wherever consumers work, rest, and play. And that means in the home, in their hotel, in the school system, so that they have a super simple way of doing something that they prefer to do and to drink. And I think this is part of the trick of, and it's part of the challenge, because we're programmed to go out, like maybe there's a happy hour and then you're going to the ballpark, and then there's like the volleyball tournament and it's off site somewhere and everyone's going to Burger King or what have you. There are some things that we have to reprogram, but then once you program them with something better and you feel that it's better, it becomes a self-creating habit that has major impacts, either individually or collectively as part of humanity.
Right. And, I'm thinking about how bottled water came to be. It was essentially seen as, okay, I think this is true. You probably know more about the industry than I do, that, okay, the consumers seem to be wanting to be a little bit healthier. They don't want all these sugary drinks. And so, but we have to maintain our profits. So we better buy some, start some water brands. And so, and there's all this talk in the wellness community about the success of getting people to drink water instead of soda, because it's the same behavior. You reach into the refrigerated thing, or you go to the shelf and you just pick up a different thing and you feel virtuous for it. So they were very good at getting us to consume the water by making it identical to the previous habit.
Right. It was. I mean, it was kind of a masterful, as you stated. It's really a masterful marketing job to create a product where no need existed at that time, but to create want and desire without need, which I think is total bunk. I mean, that's like the epitome of having a useless impact on life and humanity. To take something where zero need, in fact, kind of a negative need, and create desire and want out of it. And unfortunately, that's a lot of kind of commercialism and consumerism that has kind of evolved over time. But Big Bottle of Water did a really masterful job of that. And I think for sure, I'm not the FloWater brand, as well as kind of from my own personal perspective, I tend not to ever vilify the bottled water drinkers. I think in many ways, I think of the bottled water drinkers, I think of me at 33, overweight, just drinking soda and eating, McDonald's and working out. But I just was ridiculously naive about the impact of an extra 1,000 calories a day and what it had on my metabolism and my weight and my life. And I think of bottled water drinkers in many ways is the same way. I mean, I don't want to call them victims necessarily, but I just think they're kind of innocent bystanders or passive participants into the world's greatest marketing engine that has programmed them to think something that is needed is absolutely not. Now, there's an irony to all of this, though, which is despite, I think, us having really great quality tap water decades ago, the fact of the matter is it's degraded over the last few decades, and it's also not the municipal water treatment facility plant's fault. I think by and large they do a terrific job across the U.S., but they're very limited in what they can do. And there's two issues. One is the source of that water into municipal treatment. Over 90% of tap water, this is a recent SUNY study done in New York, over 90% of tap and bottled water contain over 300 microparticulates per liter of water. That's today, that's now. So whether you're drinking bottled water or tap water, you're drinking the plastics that are in that. And municipal water does not remove that. The second thing is another example of many is that going into this source water and through tributaries and whatnot is glyphosate. And Roundup was a chemical that was never even used 50 years ago. Now it's the #1 herbicidal product and agricultural product that's used worldwide. And we're literally drinking glyphosate on tap through an IV, but through the form of tap water that is in trace amounts. And there's a lot of people like me that are saying, hey, I'm not willing to kind of play experiment over the next 20, 30 years to see what trace amounts of glyphosate will do on my endocrine and physiological system.
Right.
So
there's a lot of people that I know who are very anti-GMO, and glyphosate is the most significant component, the thing that GMOs are there to allow into our bodies. And yet they still think that, drinking, bottled water is like, it's part of my health regimen. They don't realize they're getting the same glyphosate from the water as they're getting from their corn tacos at Taco Bell.
Right, exactly. I mean, I think the two big headlines over the next 5 to 10 years in the world of water and health and hydration are going to be glyphosate and microplastics that are in our tap water. And then there's some other issues with our kind of conventional tap water delivery distribution system here in the United States. One of those is that municipalities need to chlorinate the water to safely deliver it. But chlorine is it ends up being a toxin and cancerous in high enough doses. We don't quite know exactly what happens in super low doses over a period of time. But what we certainly know is that it's not beneficial for intestinal flora, which we also know is incredibly important for immune, anti-inflammatory, et cetera. And so, there's some things that end up happening in tap water, both through the chlorination of it, as well as the fact that, this whole infrastructure in the United States as well, worldwide, is very much built upon lead-painted pipes. And that is just an issue that, we're getting to the point where we now need to treat our tap water twice. So the irony is that bottled water became pretty prolific at a time when tap water actually was quite good decades ago. And now, however, we are in a position where bottled water is clearly seen as the new environmental cigarette. There's a mega trend away from it, but we're juxtaposed because going back to the tap, there are other issues there that we didn't have to deal with 30 years ago, like glyphosates, like microplastics, like chromium-6, and some other things as well.
Right. And we're on well water here. We're out in the country in North Carolina. There was just an expose done by some researchers at Duke University that are, Duke Energy has been dumping some stuff, and it turns out that we have high levels of dioxane, which I had never heard of. It sounds enough like dioxin to keep me up at night. But so like and I have no idea how much, what kind of runoff there is from all my neighbors' cows getting down into our water supply. But it feels like water has become another social justice issue. That from the extremes of Flint, Michigan, to like, okay, everyone I know is getting subpar tap water, and the people with the means can spend $300 on a home filter and $100 a year on replacements, and everybody else, good luck.
I would agree with that. It was not that long ago that, and it was earlier this year, that I gave a TEDx talk, and a bit of it was on the state of water, and there was this kind of juxtaposition, some of which I've already narrated and referenced as relates to the problem with single-use plastics and single-use packaging. I mean, forget just even the single-use packaging; it's all the CO2s to transport all that packaging around the world. I mean, we start to break it down, it becomes insane. And then also the state of the world of water. And while I do run a for-profit commercial business, and we do have a very specific objective around providing FloWater units wherever consumers work, rest, and play, there are also a variety of things that we can do from a societal perspective, from a municipal, from a legislative perspective, and consumer behavior perspective that will help move the ball towards more clean water for more people freely available. And that really is the goal. And so, we think we have a way and a method and a intervention that will help radically improve consumers' experience and taste and brand preference with water. That being said, I'll give you an example of one thing that I think we should do. So when you look at this utilization of cigarettes over the last 30 years, 40 years, it's gone from a high of 46% down to like 15, 16% just in the United States. It's been dramatic considering how addictive of a substance nicotine and those other various chemicals are. That was partly driven by, the health and the awareness of outcomes. That was partly, and not insignificantly, driven by social pressure and social norms. I mean, it used to be very cool to sit. In fact, I opened up the TEDx with smoking a cigarette on stage, and everyone was like losing their minds that someone just lit up a cigarette inside in a theater. But that was normal 35, 40 years ago. Like that was not abnormal, maybe 50 years ago, 40, 50 years ago. And now people are losing their minds, like ready to call 911 and like pull fire alarms. So there's been some social changes. However, I think one of the other things that has radically shifted around tobacco and is a parallel with bottled water is this level of taxation, really effectively, is what it comes down to. Is if you look at tobacco is taxed exorbitantly high. I mean, it's in the 40, 50, 60%. It depends on the state, but if you were to take an average across the United States, it's around 50%. Taxation and the increase, there's a high degree of price elasticity with tobacco products, and the higher the price is, the lower the usage of it is. And I think one of the things that we should do is, I'm all for free market, I'm all for free enterprise, but American citizens and citizens worldwide are ultimately being the detrimental inheritors of all of this garbage. If we taxed big bottled water in the same way that we tax cigarettes, we could A, use those proceeds to start to clean up some of that mess and remove the impurities, but then B, to upgrade municipal water sources so that they do provide cleaner, better tasting, more filtered water to consumers that are freely available. And so I'm, as much as I am a for-profit commercial CEO of an entity that we think we're doing something transformational, I also have a set of philosophies and beliefs that apply to whether they're drinking FloWater or not, but it really is an application towards humankind perspective and motive rather than anything that's commercially oriented.
Yeah, and I love the idea of taxation. I was just actually doing some research on this, on like I think the cigarette tax in New York or New York City is a pack is like $13, and down here in North Carolina it's around $5 or $6, and the smoking rate in North Carolina is double that in New York. And there's clear I'd like to see the legislator with the cojones to propose that. I don't exactly know the political clout of big water, except that big water is also big food.
Right.
Right. So
exactly right. I mean, that is the battle. I think what's so interesting to me about this dynamic, so much different than tobacco, it's one of the biggest distinctions, is that if you look at big bottled water, everybody now in the industry and outside the industry, I mean, you could just look at your Facebook newsfeed, and this afternoon, you're going to see 2 or 3 articles, or at least 1 or 2 articles, probably on plastics in the environment. And the chances are probably 50-50 that it'll be on bottled water or single-use plastics and single-use packaging contaminants. So now it's superfluous and it's everywhere. But I think the reality right now is that legislation can be powerful, and it can be a powerful catalyst for change. Taxation on products that are extremely detrimental, that have far-reaching consequences and cost to society, can be beneficial. I think this market's going to move faster than all of that, and that's the ultimate irony, is that there is such vilification, or either it's vilification or there's such a movement towards a better, healthier, more productive, environmentally conscious way of doing things, that I actually think this social movement, and also, just with what happens with digital and 2.0 and social media and the confluence of everyone's eyes on all things at all times anymore, I actually think that movement is going to drive us towards a plastic-free, a packaging-free world faster than any legislation or taxation or a kind of regulatory change. And that's an exciting thing, I think, from a societal perspective, when we can use kind of the force of human behavior to make this shift faster than waiting on regulation in Congress to adopt.
Right. Although, I mean, with tobacco, I think one of the big forces was the legislation that allowed discrimination, for lack of a better word, against smokers. They had to huddle in the freezing alleyways outside of work, where it became stigmatized, largely because of secondhand smoke. We have the same thing with secondhand plastic, but it's not as direct and in your face.
Right. No. Well, it's interesting. I never actually thought about legislation that might relegate all the bottled water drinkers to drink in one side of the airport or something like that. That would actually be quite a funny little YouTube spoof to do instead of commercials. But to your point, I mean, this is the problem. This is what, if you're not a bottled water drinker, you're drinking bottled water. To the point earlier about you're drinking the plastics that are in the water, and now we're all consumers of it, which actually might cause it to catalyze faster, which is if we're now all the recipients of a subsection's bad decision making around using bottled water or not recycling it appropriately, and now we're all the consumers of that. I think it might cause the market to shift all the more quickly towards saying, hey, there's a better way, let's do something better together. And I think consumers are going to rally around that. We're already starting to see that. I mean, there's a huge migration and a huge shift that we're underway, a mega trend away from single-use packaging. And it's not just getting away from something, but I believe it's moving towards something that's better. And this is why I'm such a fan of talking about hydration as well. 70% of Americans, up to 80% of people worldwide are chronically dehydrated. I mean, if doctors could write a prescription in CPT code for dehydration and prescribing water, it'd be the world's first $1 trillion drug. But like, doctors, and I'm not anti-doctor. I go see a doctor. I see both kind of a naturopath as well as a medical doctor. So I'm a fan of having a foot in both camps of that. But my point is that people are going to behave in ways that they are either trained, programmed, or economically incentivized to behave unless they see and identify something that's better. And so that's a result of medicine, which goes often to prescribing. Whereas I know you as well, is if we can wire people around the positive, high impact, high performing outcomes of slightly changed behaviors that have multifactorial benefits, such as eating cleaner and exercising a little bit more and getting properly hydrated. Like, those are all the precursors to everything else downstream. And over time, it has orders of magnitude impact. And so that's why I get excited about talking about water and hydration, is because, 70% of Americans are chronically dehydrated. And I want to be if not big part, at least a small part, along with 60 other employees at FloWater that are teammates of mine, in helping solve that.
All right. And you started out by saying that your mission is the decentralization and democratization of water. Like, for me, that resonates very much, because what I want is the decentralization and democratization of health to help people realize what's in their hands, right? Because as long as health comes from a scripts pad, then I can't get it unless I can go see a doctor. And I need, then we're talking about the insurance and all this other stuff and accessibility and which doctor. Whereas if I am the locus of control for most of my own health, and that's where the challenge is, because, there's food deserts where you can't find a decent produce section, and there are water deserts. Like, the way you're describing it, it makes it sound like the whole country is a great big water desert in terms of truly potable water that feeds our cells and doesn't damage them.
I think it's a great way of articulating it, and I think there are a lot of parallels to that, and we're starting to see an evolution around consumer behavior and food choice, food selection, food awareness. And sometimes I think it is as simple as first identifying that you have a problem, right? I mean, just if you don't know, it's like this incrementalism piece, which is, for me, when I was gaining 5 pounds a year, well, I didn't notice it after 1 year. I did notice it after 5 years and then 7 years. But, as you're going through it, you don't notice it. And then identification of the problem, and then being able to have an honest discussion with oneself, and then kind of reconciling that with what do I want, or what do we as humanity and society want to achieve, and what do we want to leave as a legacy for descendants and generations to come. I think part of that is simply around education and awareness, and I think we're seeing this incredibly powerful movement right now, where people are educating and becoming aware of food choices and also beverage and water choices at a rate that's far different today than it was 10, 20, 30 years ago. But there's still a lot of opportunity ahead of us. There's a ways to go.
Right. And I think, for the first time, it feels like consumer awareness might be outstripping the greenwashing that has tried to accommodate it and co-opt it in the past.
That's interesting. I love that perspective. I hope that's true. Because I sit in the face of the packaged water industry, I tend to still feel like there's quite a bit of greenwashing that's going on. So if you look at I'll give you an example. I'm not going to name the company, but a big bottled water company announced on Earth Day that they were either moving to aluminum, or they were launching a new piece of hardware. I can't remember what it was, but the move to aluminum was going to be at some point in the future, many years down the road. And then if it was the hardware story, and they did kind of both these announcements right around the same time, and the move to hardware was kind of a beverage dispensing piece of hardware that is, I know from some inside sources, nowhere close to being able to commercialize. There weren't many pilot locations, but they announced it on Earth Day because they want to get all the credit for it. And it's a form of greenwashing to me. And I think this is one of, if I were to look at big bottled water and big beverage, and the biggest coup that they would love to deploy right now, that we are, aggressively fighting against for the benefit of society and our environment as well as human health, is they would love nothing more than to switch somebody out. They might say, okay, we cannot slow the single-use plastic mega trend down anymore. Let's now just flip everybody to single-use aluminum. And that would be a huge travesty, because on a kind of per carbon output basis, single-use aluminum is even worse than single-use plastic. It just has kind of different varying degrees. We're going to launch an aluminum multi-use product where we believe consumers are going to reuse it 10, 20, 30, 40 times. So I'm a fan of aluminum multi-use, but that's not Big Bottled Water's strategy, and that's not Big Bottled Water's revenue generator. Their revenue generator, just much like the pharmaceutical industry and the tobacco industry, which is to commercialize those products and sell and get people to repeat usage, it's to get a single use used one time and then get a consumer to buy another one. And so I think, I think of that as greenwashing as well. So I love going back to it, I love your optimism. I hope you're right that the consumer sentiment, sensibilities, and the movement, I think it is really powerful. I mean, I think we're now seeing for the very first time consumers embracing their power of driving decisions individually and collectively faster than organizations being able to cleverly maneuver and kind of outsmart the consumer. I do think we're at that point, though I feel like a lot of companies are still working really hard at greenwashing too. So I don't mean to sound skeptical on that point, but I'm mixed on it.
Well, I am too. I just thought it was I thought I would say something positive once in a while.
No, it's very aspirational, and
I think there is truth though to. I mean, as much as the social media companies have been playing us. There's little bits of democracy that sneak in, and one of them is being like the call out culture when appropriate of companies that are BSing, that that appear to be like, for me, like the greenwashing in bottled water is literal. That I've noticed that the packaging has turned from blue to green, and they have little recycling stickers bigger, and it says now 15% less plastic. This lid or this plastic is now thinner. It's like, oh, now I'm a good person.
That's like moving. So the joke that I always make is, look, I think that's and I try not to vilify. I never vilify I don't mind vilifying the product, bottled water. I tend to think of the employees that are pushing those products are also kind of in this ecosystem that if they could just see a better way. I used to work in the pharmaceutical industry, and the reality is when you work in the pharmaceutical industry, you can be a really good person with really great aspirations, but at the end of the day, if you're working on a brand like Prozac, you are paid and you are incentivized on how much Prozac goes out the door. It's not like the right usage and the right use case, and the right indication. And so it becomes kind of a mushkambul of like, well, what is the right thing to do, and how do I do this appropriately? How do I make sure we're like doing things like keeping our job and growing the business and what have you? And I tend to think of people that are hawking big bottled water individually are probably really good people that are really misguided. And if there's a better way to drive them, and that's part of our responsibility as well, is to be a facilitator of that.
Right. Well, and I mean, it's easy to vilify individuals, and that doesn't change anything, right? Like when especially the issue is the system. Like for me, like I don't know you, so I don't know if you want to go here with me. But like one of the things I think is the problem is that water is no longer seen as sacred, and for me, from a lot of spiritual traditions, at least, certainly non-Western ones, indigenous ones, water is the blood of Mother Earth. We are her children, and the fact that you could, that a company like Nestle could lay claim to public water, dry it up, bottle it, sell it back to us, it feels very spiritually wrong, and it's a system issue. It's not an individual issue.
Well, I think one of the things that I do describe when I talk about water is that in the United States, we have driven to a complete commoditization of water to the point where there is almost no perceived value to it unless you happen to package it up in a bottle and sell it for $3. Then suddenly we say, oh, there's value to water when we put it in a pretty package and it comes from an exotic country and we ship it all the way here and then we ship it all over the US, then it's worth $3 for 1 liter. And so what we have seen is a complete commoditization of something that is literally the most precious, well, one of, if not debatably, the most precious and important resource that should also be, in my belief, a fundamental right. I mean, a fundamental right of humanity. And our job is, again, commercially, to work on taking the rights that are available to citizens today and improving that experience and to making tap water better. But philosophically, I think we would probably see a lot of alignment together on what is a fundamental right. And water is spiritual, and it is soulful, and it is, it's how, if you look at the formation of civilization, it was built around water in many cases, right? I mean, so there's so many intricate layers to it. And so I would fully agree that there's been this commoditization of water that's not come in a single package, a single-use package, but through distribution. And when I talk about this, one of our goals is to decommoditize water so that people see a real value. And here's the irony, Howard, is that if you go into Whole Foods, and I love Whole Foods, but if you go into Whole Foods, you can pick any grocery anymore, actually any chain, but I'll just pick Whole Foods as an example. I mean, we're practically in a yogurt bubble. There's like 80 different brands of yogurt, and there's sheep's milk, and there's goat milk, and there's $5 yogurt. So when I was growing up, there were like 2 brands of yogurt. Like there was one for 39 cents and like 99 cents.
Right, it was Columbo and Dannon.
Right, exactly, right? And so now, I'm like in a yogurt decision matrix for 5 minutes when I go to Whole Foods in the dairy aisle because there's so many choices and I'm reading the label. But my point around that is in some categories that were so commoditized, like dairy, yogurt, butter, milk, plant-based milks now, right? So now you take it to all these plant-based milks. There's been a total reset around the value of quality and ingredients and source and delivery. And I feel like our need and our opportunity and frankly our responsibility is to do that with water and how water is delivered, distributed, consumed, and enjoyed ultimately by every man, woman, and child is the vision of the company. But that is a more important kind of societal vision than anything else as well.
Yeah, I love that. That there is this better way, and it's more elegant. So this is where like the entrepreneurship bit comes in. That what we really have to do is remove things from water as opposed to add things, or remove things from the process or from the system that delivers water. That like for you to get healthy, largely involved taking things out of your life.
Right.
Right. And the same thing is true of how we're going to fix water.
Right. Yeah. I like how you've super simplified it into that, which is in like for me, I guess going back to setting behavioral change, look, some people sometimes can't do 5, 6, 7 things, they can't take 5 things out and add 5 things and have this, like some people are wired obviously to do that. In other cases, taking 2 things out is a great example of, we'll just do this. It's how I got into intermittent fasting. I'll use another example of that is I didn't start going, and I don't know how you feel about intermittent fasting, so you might not want to talk much about this. But
no, it's fine. It's fine.
I didn't go to like 1 meal a day overnight, and sometimes I do one meal a day. But I started by stopping eating at 8, and then I would do like a definitive 12 hours, and then I'd go to like 14, then I'd go to 16. Now I typically run like an 18-6 or 24 fast 5 days a week. But to your point though, sometimes it is just stopping with a cessation of a few things that can have such a positive impact. And then what you find out is you have space in your life for those other things. And when you fill it with those other things that are better, it kind of creates a natural virtuous cycle where you're like, oh, I actually feel better because that's gone. And I feel even better because I added it with something good. And that's how positive behaviors in many ways can get reinforced and reduplicated. But it's hard to make that initial change, I think. I think that the hardest part is the first step. It's like if you're going to run a marathon and you start training, I think The hardest mile in a marathon is the first day you decide to start training for it. That's the hardest. Like it's mile 2 or mile 3 in your training program. It really is, having run like half a dozen different marathons. I'm not some prolific marathoner, but because that's the psychological one. Like it might not have been as physically hard, but that psychologically was the hardest one to get into, that set the stage for all the other miles.
Right. And I think that's why, the plant-based movement had this genius idea of Meatless Mondays. It was a way for people to practice something and to more importantly, practice living into an identity. That once you say, okay, this means I'm healthier. This means that I care about the environment, right? So like the other thing we've seen in terms of water over the last, I would say 5 years, there's the technology of water bottles, just what I can buy in the store. Like, I remember when all you could get was the Army canteen, right? And everything tasted like shit from the Army canteen. And now they've got, the hydro flasks and the thermal flasks and the glass stuff that almost having these things, and because they're so public, that it has a buzz element to it that you can say, I want this means I'm a healthy person. You just look at yourself, look at your behavior, look at your purchasing, and that can then open up the identity to lots of other positive changes.
Yeah, I think that's a great call out. And, ironically, in many ways, I think the refillable has become, if you remember the fountain pen and what it represented in the 80s of like status or pens in general, it's like the new fountain pen almost, which is, it's a status symbol, it's personal, it says something about you, it's like incorporated into your everyday. And I think that has, the proliferation of some amazing brands that are out there, Swell, Mizu, Hydro Flask, Clean Canteen, many others, has driven a level of, this is part of actually the magic of the shift that we're under, which is, it's not only that it tastes better and it's a better experience, they fit a little bit better depending on like whether you're throwing it in a bag or in a car, what have you, but they're also cool. Like suddenly carrying a refillable around has become cool, and you can make them cooler through unique designs or stickers or what have you. And so that's, I think, all part of the shift. So like part of that shift is for us is like, all right, great, like get them going with refillable, but now, from a FloWater perspective, is we want to make sure what you're putting in that refillable, you also equally love, and is free of contaminants, and is hydrating you well so that you prefer it to what's in a bottle or what's coming out of the tap. But I think your point about the refillables is a magical one, which is that has perpetuated this whole mega shift that is not going away now. This is now a mega trend that's immutably happening, and we're in the middle of right now.
All right. So before I let you go, I want to know a little bit about FloWater. Like, what comes out of that, and how does it get there? Like, what's the difference between that and just coming out of the tap?
So going back to FloWater, and on your podcast notes or the blog, there's probably going to be a series of links to an Instagram or a picture of the FloWater refill station. But it's a 6-foot-tall refill station that plugs into any potable water line. It runs hundreds of feet. We primarily put these FloWater refill stations into hotels, schools, corporations, gyms, and retailers. We are also working on a variety of other products that would go into the home and consumer household by the end of next year, we expect. But the idea ultimately is that you can have FloWater wherever you work, rest, and play. What FloWater does is, after it takes a water line that gets connected to a FloWater refill station, there's 7 stages of purification and filtration that tap water goes through. I'm not going to go through each one of the specific filters. Effectively, those 7 filters do one of 3 things with tap water. One is it removes up to 99.9% of the contaminants that are in tap water. Glyphosate, pharmaceuticals, herbicides, pesticides, heavy metals, chlorine, fluoride. So the first whole set of filters are just extracting things that are in your tap water that you don't want to be in there. The second stage are re-enhancing that water with electrolytes like calcium, magnesium, potassium, sodium, trace minerals, increasing the pH by up to 1.5. And then
so in other words, this is like what it would be if it like trickled down the rocks.
Exactly.
Like before civilization, you just went to the stream and got your water.
That's exactly what it is, which is, I mean, if everyone had those in the backyard, it kind of before all the soil contamination, agricultural byproducts, that is the best source. Like that is nirvana for water consumption. So if you and I had one of those in our backyard, that's what, and all of us did, that's what we would all be advocating all day long. So it's the recreation of that is, you know, Earth had kind of this most natural, pure filtering mechanism before it became contaminated and polluted particularly over the last 100 years. But then second is that it was naturally enhanced with electrolytes and minerals that were healthy and vitalizing, and not only tasted good, but also were good for the absorption and the proper hydration experience. And then this third stage of filters and purification that we use in a FloWater refill station is with a coconut carbon filter. So we take these coconut, there's a market in a specific region in Asia that has this rich volcanic soil. So we'll take, we buy from a source that takes these coconuts, that carbonates the husks, that turns it into granulated carbon. That is then the final finishing filter where FloWater is running through, and it gives it this taste that consumers love, that's fresh and crisp and clean. And those three things together are what create a FloWater experience where consumers end up drinking less soda, less coffee, 2 to 5-fold increase in hydration, and also we see a significant reduction up to 80% or more of single-use packaging when we have a FloWater installed. So that's what FloWater is, that's how it works, and we put these all throughout the United States. We're in the process of expanding internationally right now, but you can find FloWater in 50 different states, or almost 50 states, in each of those verticals, as I mentioned before.
Gotcha. And what segments have been the most open to putting them in? I'd never seen one before the gym, but I don't go to a lot of public places. You know, I have a podcast. I live at home. So, like, where was it the easiest to make an argument that led to sales?
I would say, if we look at the market over the last 6 months, I'll talk about the last 6 months. One, hospitality, hotels. There's and a lot of this, by the way, this is driven by consumers. So consumers are coming into hotels saying, I don't want bottled water. I don't want to pay for that. I don't want to see it. I don't agree with it. It's wasteful. It literally has become the new environmental cigarette. So we're seeing hotels rapidly make a shift based upon consumer advocacy and adoption and behavior change to say they want something better, and they want to be able to fill up a refillable. And part of that also is in hotels, they're seeing a ton of consumers, 30-40% of consumers or more are walking around with a refillable, and they need to have a place to be able to hydrate. And you know, we're also with this dichotomy that 70-75% of Americans don't like or don't trust tap water. So hotels is a big one. Gyms is another one. That's a second one. And then we're seeing those would be the two primary, hotels and gyms. And that's partly because they have consumers with a strong voice around what they like or prefer or will do, and they are voting with dollars. And then third is corporations, but you know, those are more influencing conversations with consumers rather than they are voting with their literal wallet and walking in saying, this is what I want. And those are the markets where we're going to see the greatest propensity or receptivity to, you know, behavior change. And so that's the result of where we're seeing the fastest growth, hotels and then gyms in particular.
Gotcha. So I want to end by maybe getting some like how to or what to do tips for people who've been listening to this, because obviously, you know, I can go and fill up at the gym. I have a Berkey filter on my counter, and in the kitchen. You know, I never wanted to use Brita because I saw people like had their little, you know, refrigerator Brita filters that they didn't change for like 3 years, and I got real. But like for people who don't, you know, until your home product comes out, you talked about, you know, advocating when you go to a hotel to speak up, to maybe be a voice. What can people do right now, both to help themselves and to help the world?
Okay, so one is, I think in terms of helping yourself. I don't know if it helps to kind of take a log and log what you're consuming and drinking during the course of the day, and how much of that is soda versus tea versus, you know, energy drinks versus soda versus water. But I would say the best thing that you can do for yourself today, ultimately, regardless of source, even though I worry significantly about what's in some tap water, what's in some bottled water as it relates to microplastics, it is to drink enough water. 70 to 80% of Americans are chronically dehydrated. This affects everything: your mood, your skin elasticity, your energy levels, your satiety, what you eat, how you eat, hunger, digestion, absorption. It's like the gateway to everything else in many ways. So I think the very first thing that, and people say, I think about, you hear the message, drink water. Well, it's different when you say, hear the message, drink water. You're actually going to feel dramatically better, or you're going to wake up more refreshed, or you're going to naturally eat a little bit healthier or a little bit less, or you're going to have better concentration. And so, and it doesn't just work if you do it for a day. A day is important, but for 30 days, go out and hydrate your thirst in a way where you might not even have the thirst or know that you have it, but use it as a substitute for all these other things that you're drinking, and you're going to notice a dramatic impact on energy, vitality, and it's like little changes built up over time end up being big changes, as in life, but also as in hydration. So that would be one big one. I think the second, as it relates to just drinking enough water, the second one is, I'd be advocating. I mean, if I, as a consumer, I would be advocating for wherever I work, rest, and play to have access to filtered and purified drinking water that's package free. And I would be saying it's not enough to have, I talked to somebody the other day and they said, we saw, they were in the sustainability world. And they said, we solved our big plastic water bottle problem. I was like, what'd you end up doing? And I actually thought they were going to tell me that they installed a bunch of FloWater units, because I was getting all excited. And they said, we're moving to aluminum. It's like, well, no, you're actually, that all you're doing is going from Marlboro Reds to Marlboro Lights. Like, that's progress, but you're still smoking. So let's get into a decentralized, distributed product where water is drinkable at wherever that tap is. Part of that is, work at the municipal level, but then there's stuff that companies can be doing today that will eliminate the need for packaging where none exists. And so that would be my one call out is really around just the simplicity of drinking water and why I think it's so beneficial and how it'll change your listeners' lives. And sometimes you just have to do it because you hear people do it, but you don't actually do it. But the second is really around the mission of doing something to help drive the environment that we want and the generations that we want to leave behind for, which is to unpackage our water, which is to drink unpackaged water and let us not create packaging unnecessarily where no need exists. The only thing that exists is a marketer's want for us to think we need that. That's the only, in most cases, and if you're in the middle of a desert, fine, a bottle of water. But my point is, let's move towards unpackaged solutions wherever possible, and request that wherever you work, rest, and play, which is what will drive the decision-making of managers, directors, CEOs, VPs, people that are buyers and and distributors.
All right. Well, those are two. They're simple and they're clear. And I think let's go do them. Let's go make it happen for ourselves and for all other living beings on this planet.
Howard, thanks so much. It was a pleasure to be on your show, and I really enjoyed the dialogue. And thank you for what you're doing and advocating towards healthier ways that are going to ultimately empower people. And that's what I get excited about, and I know you as well. So thank you. Right
on. Yeah, and thank you for your perspectives. I really appreciate your willingness to decommercialize the conversation, and I like to talk about the bigger picture rather than just your own commercial interest. And I gotta say, I do. I'm a user of the product. I'm an end user, and it's great stuff. And I hope you take on the Goliaths and slay bottled water.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be on the show. Thank you again.
All right, take care. All right, I'll drink to that. How about that? A healthy world, a clean world with safe drinking water for everyone. So check out the show notes for today at plantyourself.com/359. We've got that SUNY study, an article, information about FloWater, also Raz's TEDx talk, bottled water is the new cigarette. So if you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to support the mission, the cheapest, freest, easiest way to do that is to subscribe and leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Stitcher or wherever you get your podcasts. Of course, you can also share this episode with other people if you think they'd be into it. And of course, you can become a patron of the show. You can throw some money my way to help defray the cost. Remember, this podcast is free for everyone and funded by those who can afford it. So if you're one of the lucky latter, I would love your help in pushing this mission forward. Got a little bit of garden news. Yesterday, the weather was kind of nice and balmy-ish in the afternoon, and I went out and I took a whole bunch of little potatoes, little red and Yukon Gold potato-lets that had been sprouting in the house, and I planted them and covered them up with mulch. And, you know, it really wasn't worthy of a social media post. It really was not a big deal. Just make a little divot in the soil, toss a little potato in, cover it up. And when I was done with the whole bed, I went and grabbed a couple of wheelbarrows full of wood chips and covered them up. And, like, not a big deal, right? And yet, in a few months, maybe in the late spring, early summer, when the plants mature and there's full potatoes, then that's going to be like, ooh, look, I'm going to take pictures of that. I'm going to show them off. I'm going to get a big photograph of all the potatoes in a big basket, and people are going to be impressed. But really, it's the little stuff I did yesterday that's going to make the difference. And it reminds me of our health habits, right? We love to post the runs, the big things, the races, the results on the scale. But it's really the little, very not sexy daily things that we do, the planting, the seeds, the seed potatoes of our future self that are so important. In running news, I had a really strong run on Sunday afternoon. The sun was going down. I hadn't done much, and I was thinking of it as a rest day. And instead, I just went out for okay, I'm just going to do a 3-minute or a 3-mile little jog up and down the street, just kind of shake things out. And the more I ran, the better I felt. And I ended up doing negative splits all the way, starting at a 9:30 mile, 9:29. At the end, I was down into the 8:40s, and I ended up doing 6 miles, coming home in the dark, watching out for cars because I didn't bring any lights or reflection with me. But it felt really good. And part of what I'm doing differently is I'm really foam rolling a lot and working out with a personal trainer for a couple of times at the gym to really get my gait and to turn on the right muscles and to release some fascial knots that have been creeping in and affecting my form. So I'll hopefully be posting a lot more happy runs and letting you know about them over the next weeks and months. All right, time for thanks. Thanks to Will Ridenauer for allowing me to use his beautiful song Sabali Dawn, the Dance of Peace. Check out willridenauer.com for more of his gorgeous West African kora music. And of course, thanks to all of you Plant Yourself podcast patrons. Got a new name this week, so if you listen all the way to the end, you'll hear it. Kim Harrison, Lynn McClellan, Anthony Disson, Brittany Porter, Dominic Marrow, Barbara Whitney, Tammy Black, Amy Good, Amanda Hatherley, Mary Jane Wheeler, Ellen Kennelly, Melissa Cobb, Rachel Burns, Christine Nielsen, Tina Sharp, Tina Ahern, Janet Volkanovsky, David Bizek, The Mysterious, Michelle X, Elspeth Feldman, Victoria Dolomanova, Leah Stoller, Alan Christensen, Colleen Peck, Michelle Andrew, Josina, Julianne Roland, Stu Dolnick, Sarah Durkis, Run the Circus, Kelly Cameron, Wayne Pedersen, Leanne Peterson, Janet Selby, Claire Adams, Tom Francis, Janet Benham, Gila Sarah, David Donahue, Blair Seibert, Doruna Vizov, Gio and Carol Argentati, Jody Friesen, Ruth Ann Funderburg, Misha Rosen. Michael Warbeck, The Equally Mysterious, Tracy Z, Alicia Lemus, Rebecca Hughes, Val Linneman, Rhymes with Cinnamon, Nick Harper, Stephanie Holmes, Martha Berger, Nicole Ramsey, Susan Amon, Molly Bean, The Inscrutable Harry R, Susan Laverty, The Panda Vegan, Craig Kovic, Adam Sharp, Karen Burry, Heather Morgan, Ashley Corcoran, Kelly Machia, Deanne Norton, Bonnie Lynch, and Plant Happy Oregon, Sabina Kurtzel, Nigel Davies, Marion Blum, Teresa Copel, Shil Rutledge, Julian Watkins, Breed O'Connell, Brian Sheridan, Shannon Hirschman, Kate Roseland, Dayat, Julie Langholm, Hedda Cardi, Zatusan Connie Hainline, Aaron Greer, Alicia Davis, Aviva Lael, Heather O'Connor, Carolyn Jensen, Cherry Olikoski, Plant Powered for Health, Karen Smith, Scott Marani. Karen and Joe Crabtree, Tanya Lewis, Kirby Burton, Teresa Carell, Kevin McCauley, Elizabeth Rothschild, Kelly Baker, Miracle, Dan Jesse, Cheryl Dwyer, Jenny Hazelton, Valerie Peltier, Peter W. Evans, Colleen Harrison, Justine Divitt, Joshua Sommermeyer, Dennis Bird, Darby Kelly, Laurie Fanny, Linnea Lundquist, Valerie Hummel, Deb Garcia, Emily Iaconelli, Levi Wallach, Rosamund McAtee, Dan Picorni, Stephen Lehman, Patty DiMartino, Mike and Donna Carts, Deanne Bishop, Bill Brie Elf, Gunter Schmidt, Marjorie Lewis, Kelly Molden, Tricia Adams, Ian Kramer, Nancy Sheldon, Lindsay Basher, Gunn-Marie Hagan, Tracy Gullis, Laura Heaton, Meg from Mama Says, Rochelle Kennedy, Joan Borstein, Diana Goldman, Stacey Stokes, Ben Savage, Michael Kay, Holly Butler, David Hughes, Connie Rogers, Claire England, Sally Robertson, Param Ganshi, Amy Daly, Brian Tourville, and Mark Jeffrey Johnson for your generous support of the podcast. That's it for this week. As always, be well, my friends. So if you appreciate the Plant Yourself podcast and would like to help support the mission of the show, there's a few easy ways to do it. One is to just go to wherever you get your podcasts and leave a review. Let other people know about it. Give us some stars. Give us some love. And that really helps us be found by more people. Something else, of course, you can do is let someone know about this podcast. Someone who you think would benefit. Send them maybe a couple of episodes that you think would pique their interest, or just ask them to subscribe in general. And third, you can join arms and become a patron, a financial supporter of this show. You may have noticed that there's no advertising in the show, and it's free for everyone, and it's supported, paid for by those who can afford it. So if you would like to make a one-time contribution or an ongoing monthly pledge, you can do so at plantyourself.com/gift. All right, time for thanks. Thanks to Will Ridenauer for allowing me to use his beautiful song, Sabali Dawn, The Dance of Peace. You can find more of Will's music at his website, willridenauer.com. And of course, thanks to all of you Plant Yourself podcast patrons. Kim Harrison, Lynn McClellan, Anthony Disson, Brittany Porter, Dominic Maurer, Barbara Whitney, Tammy Black, Amy Good, Amanda Hatherley, Mary Jean Wheeler, Ellen Kennelly, Melissa Cobb, Rachel Behrens, Christine Nielsen, Tina Sharp, Tina Ahern, Jen Filikanovsky, David Vizek, The Mysterious, Michelle X, Elspeth Feldman, Leah Stoller, Alan Christensen, Colleen Peck, Michelle Andrews, Josina, Sarah Durkis, Rhymes with Circus, Kelly Cameron, Wayne Pedersen, Janet Selby, Kara Adams, Tom Franzek, Jeanette Benham, Gil Assert, David Donahue, Blair Cyber, Torona Vizo, Gio and Carol Argentati, Jody Friesner, with Ann Funderburg, Misha Rosen, Michael Warbeck, The Equally Mysterious, Tracy Z, Aviva Lael, Alicia Lemus, Rebecca Hughes, Val Linneman, Rhymes with Cinnamon, Nick Harperson, Martha Bergner, Susan Ahmad, Molly Levine, The Inscrutable Harry R., Susan Laverty, The Panda Vegan, Craig Kovic, Adam Scharf, Karen Burry, Heather Morgan, Kelly Machia, Deanne Norton, Bonnie Lynch, Plant Happy Oregon, Sabina Kurtzels, Nigel Davies, Marion Blum, Teresa Copel, Julian Watkins, Breed O'Connell, Shannon Hirschman, Linda Ayat, Colm Hedegaard, Isa Tuzawa, Connie Hainline, Aaron Greer, Alicia Davis, Heather O'Connor, Carolyn Jensen, Sherry Orlikowski of Plant Powered for Health, Karen Smith, Scott Morani, Karen and Joe Crabtree, Tanya Lewis, Kirby Burton, Teresa Carell, Kevin McCauley, Elizabeth Rothschild, Ann Jesse, Cheryl Dwyer, Jenny Hazelton, Valerie Peltier, Peter W. Evans, Colleen Harrison, Justine Divitt, Joshua Sommermeyer, Dennis Bird, Darmy Kelly, Laurie Fanny, Linnea Lundquist, Valerie Hummel, Emily Iaconelli, Levi Wallach, Rosamund McAtee, Dan McCorney, Stephen Lehman, Patty DiMartino, Mike and Donna Carts, Deanne Bishop, Bill Brie Elf, Gunter Schmidt, Marjorie Lewis, Kelly Molden, Tricia Adams, Ian Kramer, Nancy Sheldon, Lindsay Basher, Gunn-Marie Hagan, Tracy Gullis, Laura Heaton, Meg from Mama Says, Rochelle Kennedy, Diana Goldman, Stacey Stokes, Ben Savage, Michael Kay, Holly Butler, David Hughes, Connie Rogers, Claire England, Sally Robertson, Param Ganshi, Amy Daly, Brian Tourville, Mark Jeffrey Johnson, Josie Dempsey, Karen Schmidt, Pamela Hayden, Emily Perryman, Olga Sidorowska, Allison Corbett, Richard Stone, Lauren Vaught of Edible Musings, Aaron Hasty, Sean Owen, Sagar Nayak, Erica Piedra, and Danielle Roberts for your generous support of the podcast. That's it for today. As always, be well, my friends.